Hi, welcome to Toys in the Hood. So just the other week I got hold of the copy of the Die roleplay game, which I supported on Kickstarter. It arrived the other week and I thought this would be a good opportunity to kind of share it with you as a kind of first look. I've not played it yet, but they did send the PDF out earlier last year, which is something pretty cool actually. I've seen a lot of Kickstarters have done this, where you'll order the book, but of course the PDF's ready way before then. They send it out, you have a good chance to peruse and kind of build some excitement and start playing right away if you want. So I have had the chance to have a really good read through. The level I supported it at came with a GM screen, standard hardback rulebook and a set of dice. There were other pledges available. You could have just got the PDF, and then all the way up to like a super deluxe copy with a different front cover that also came with a set of luxury dice from Level Up. So yeah, kind of gutted that I missed out on that one. But the good news is it meant I could afford to eat a couple of months last year, so that's a bonus. So first up, the premise. So Die is based on the Die comics. I'm not going to spoil the story here. I enjoyed the comics way too much to go and then ruin it for someone else. But the basic idea is, in the 80s, a group of kids play a game that's not dissimilar to Dungeons and Dragons. They're playing that one night and then they disappear. They return 2 years later, mysteriously, no memory of what's happened, and they get on with their lives. Then, as they're approaching 40, in fact I think it's one of their 40th birthdays that's kind of the start of this, they find themselves returning to this game world that they've spent 2 years in. Now the game deals with some seriously mature themes and the relationship between all the characters, and so in a way it's not really about the fantasy world so much as it's about the characters themselves and then how people see themselves as well. So there were 20 issues published over 3 years. I've got the graphic novels, which each one has 5 issues, so there's 4 of them that make the set. There's also then been Image Comics have released a hardback version which has all of them together. I think you can get that for something like £60. Now, I began role-play games when I was a nerdy teenager myself, pretty much in the 90s, not quite the 80s. But this whole series has therefore really struck a chord with me, especially as I myself, I'm now in my 40s as well. So it'd be interesting to hear from you guys to see how you found it as well. If you've played it, if you've read those comics, did it strike a chord with you in the same way? Or are you younger? Does it be interesting to see how different people relate to this? Anyway, on with the game. So there's the book. The book's beautiful. It's a hardback. There's nice images down the spine. It's got a great front cover. It's a really, really beautiful book. You've got the bookmarks, which I don't think's ever stopped me buying a book, but I do really appreciate them when they're in a book that I end up with. And then the book itself is full of beautiful artwork. I think a fair bit is lifted from the comics and then repurposed in this, but then they've also clearly commissioned some more as well. There's even a little comic at the beginning that sort of introduces you and sets the scene. The text is quite large as you go through it, and you do get the feeling that the book could be condensed. It could be a lot smaller if they really wanted to, if you wanted to make it a lot more together. But actually, I quite like dipping into game books. You know, I don't always sit there with a role-play game and read it from cover to cover. I'll sort of pick it up, have a look at some sections, put it down, and I find the larger text sort of lends itself to that a little bit better. So the book is divided up into different sections. There's the introduction, you've then got the rules, paragons, which are like the characters. There's the master, who's your kind of dungeon master. There's the rituals. There's running die, there's building die, building the worlds. There's a bestiary, there's a campaign rules, and then there's scenarios and social groups. And then lastly, there's appendices. So it's just a highlight view, so I'm not gonna go into it in massive depth. The rules are pretty straightforward at their heart. You build a pool of dice, you roll them, 4 or more are successes. Obviously you're looking to get more successes depending on the difficulty of the task in hand. So that's the rules covered. There's paragons. Now these are the classes. They're kind of I think to me they're the most iconic part of the Die universe, and they're kind of twisted versions of of certain D&D classes. They're also each represented by a die type. So there's the dictator. The dictator is represented by a D4. These are artistic diplomats who manipulate emotions with horrifical magical words, the description. Now, I can't remember the exact quote that creator Kieran Gillen uses, but I think it's something along the lines of, Dictators are bards in a world where everyone is fucking terrified of bards. They're able to influence people, but it's not really a nice influence. It's a bit like the Dungeons and Dragons wish spell, where it's subject to interpretation, and it's going to take it to the extreme. So if you tell someone to travel the world forever, that's exactly what they'll do, and they'll do it until the day they die. And then they'll keep going as some sort of zombified corpse. They will just keep following what they've been told. In fact, it's occurred to me, a really good example of this is the character Preacher in the comic book Preacher. He's possessed by Genesis, a half angel, half demon, and that means that whatever he says, people do. And that's very similar to the Dictator. They're not nice. There's the Fools. Fools have a D6. They can roll this, use it to automatically succeed at rolls. They're kind of swashbucklers. They rush into danger, and they're just naturally lucky. Then there's an Emotion Knight. This is a D8 that represents these. These are warriors. They have like one sacred emotion that they focus on, and then they also have a sentient weapon. So they're like paladins with talking swords, but rather than a set of beliefs, they're very much focused on one emotion. And then in the rules, there's kind of the degree of emotion is all explained. Obviously, the stronger they feel the emotion, the more devastating the effects are that their powers have. There's then Neos. Neos are technomagical rogues. They have cybernetic kind of powers and gifts, and they power these with fair gold. Now, fair gold is gold that it basically only exists for a day. So every morning, the Neo is going to have to go and find fair gold to power their abilities, and the next day they're going to have to go and do it again. They're a bit at odds with the kind of fantasy setting, but in the comics, the reason one's there is it's one of the guy's younger sisters is playing it, and I think she wants to play a cyberpunk, so that's where this kind of comes in. But actually, they're quite a fun class. It seems they seem to work quite well in this. Then there's Godbinders. So Godbinders are clerics, but rather than worship a god, they kind of strike a bargain with the patron of gods, and they're trying to get the best deal to get the miracles. And what happens is, as they gain the powers from the gods, they'll end up owing these gods favours, and of course they're going to have to repay them. So this is going to kind of generate adventures just on its own accord. And then lastly, there's Masters. So these are effectively the Dungeon Master. They get the D20, and they're the guys who'll be running the game. So the roleplay game looks to capture the feel of the comics, and there's a large section is devoted to setting up a scenario that sort of follows these. So you're looking at getting a group together, looking at what the characters are like then in the real world. So the characters, you've got the character in the game, and then you've got the persona, who is the character that you're playing that is playing that character. And once you've established what the persona is, there's a lot of bringing the kind of, essentially the emotional baggage that character has is being brought into the fantasy world, and that's going to help create the monsters, create the plot, help them have issues that they're going to resolve. There's a lot of good stuff in the book about role-playing with mature subjects, and then the sort of standard adventure is presented as a ritual. The book does a good job of holding your hands through this. It gives you bullet points that you need to bear in mind when creating the world. It also gives you questions to ask the players to help them draw out their characters to find out what they want. Questions that they might answer themselves, or they might answer as their persona. And so essentially, I'm going to do a bit of a massive disservice with this, but essentially the ritual is that everyone gets together. The master sets the scene, and he holds out the dice. So he gives the D4 to the Dictator, the D6 to the Fool, the D8 to the Neo, etc. You then go on an adventure. You'll face a series of adversaries and scenarios that are drawn on what your personas have created, and it's a kind of twisted version of their real lives. And then once your adventure's done, everyone gathers around, and you get to say if you're done or not, if you want to go home. If everyone wants to say go home, everyone goes home and the adventure ends. You sort of then do a sort of appendix, I guess, where you look at how their real lives then go on. If not everyone wants to go home, then you just keep going and you keep resolving these issues and playing these adventures. So there's loads of good advice about what questions you should be asking characters to help them build the world and to build scenarios yourself. And then there's some more scenario ideas as well in the book. as I said, with the content, so there is a definite order to it. Certainly there's a lot of the die world building, the scenarios and the ritual. I think they all kind of tie in together, with how you're going to run a game. Then there's the bestiary. So the bestiary in here, a lot of the creatures feel like just adventures in themselves. They're really good descriptions. You've got a stat block, you've got special rules for monsters, and quite a lot of these monsters are just your standard fantasy ones. But they'll also reflect things from real life. So, for example, if your character, if your persona has an issue with their boss at work, that might be represented by a dragon. That would be the ideal thing to represent them there. Alternatively, the group of frat boys across the hall in the dorms, that might actually be centaurs. They're always swigging beer and off they go. So that kind of obnoxious character becomes a centaur and gives you a chance to confront them. They then also, as well as the stats, you've got a bit about the truths of the monsters. So these are little kind of snippets on the monster. Quite often they feel like the kind of writer's musings as you go through this. And sometimes you'll sit and you go, oh, hang on, I knew this. I knew this fact. But actually, it's a good way to get you thinking about how you're going to use them in a game. So I think it's a really nice touch, actually. There's just a bit more to them than the normal stat block that you get in an adventure, which I think is good, because I think Die needs its monsters to do a little bit more kind of lifting to reflect the world. And I like this section a lot. I like the bestiary a lot. The one thing that I think really lets it down a little bit is it'd be nice if every creature had an illustration. And although I said that as one of my first thoughts, and I went through and actually there's a fair few illustrations there, but there's definitely some blank pages that are just text. It would be nicer if that was a bit more filled out. So as I said, I supported the Kickstarter at a level where I also got a DM screen and the dice. So here's the GM screen. It's really nice, actually. There's not a lot of rules in there. There's some kind of basic NPC stats in there of the kind of the basic characters that you might very quickly need rather than any of the monsters. There's the summary of the stats, and then some simple questions that you might want to need to ask the players as you play in the game. There's then the dice. Now these are from Level Up. They're quite nice. The box sadly came apart, though it's magnetic, and it's just a case of stick it together, so that's going to be fine. And it's Level Up dice, which I was quite excited by. I've seen them advertised a few times. I thought, oh, these are going to be quality. These are just the cheaper resin dice, and they kind of sit in the fine camp of products. They're dice. They're not as exciting as I felt it was when I backed this, and they do make me wish that I'd supported the Kickstarter at the higher level for the holographic dice. Although the holographic dice are going to be nice because they're something like $200 for the upgrade. But the dice are an important part of the die game. So if you're ever going to splash out on some for a game, I think this would be it. In conclusion, I like the comic a lot, and I really think that this game captures the feel of them. The system seems pretty straightforward, with nice touches for the paragons with their individual abilities, and they seem straightforward to begin with. I'm sure the extra rules and stuff that you've got, they could probably add up and get a little bit unwieldy as it goes on. But as I say, I haven't played it, so I've not quite seen that in action. There's the book itself. It's lovely. It's really nicely laid out. It looks great on the shelf, and it was a really good read. It's really nicely presented. There's a good sense of humour to the whole thing, and it really spoke to me as a gamer. I think my biggest problem with this game is I can just see it being really hard getting a group together that's going to appreciate it. You're going to need a mature group. It's not a straightforward dungeon crawl. It feels more like it would suit some sort of improv group. You'd want to be going backwards and forwards, wanting to explore the issues that you might have in real life and then using in a game. I don't think it would work for any game that I'm a part of, which kind of made me sad, as it did appeal. It makes me think like, oh, I could capture that sort of that youth of when I was gaming, but also how I am now that I'm old. But I think my old players, I'm kind of imagining a gaming group that I've never been part of there. But I think if you've got a group that you think this would suit, then I think this is a really, really good game to get stuck into for that kind of. It certainly seems to offer an experience that's not quite like any other roleplay game I've seen. I'm very glad that I supported it, so I'd definitely recommend that you give it a go if you found this of interest. And it's definitely unique. It also provides other bits and pieces that I think just makes you think about role playing a little bit more and what you're doing and what people might get for it. So in a way, a lot of what I've read in this game, I'm probably not going to play it, being brutally honest, but a lot of what I've learnt from reading the book, I think I'm going to take into other games and think about how we interact and what people are doing when they play characters and things. It's just it does give a little bit more depth to your normal role playing. So thank you very much for listening. This has been just a quick overview of the Die role-playing game. Say it turned up in the post, got all excited, wanted to talk about it. So I hope you found this interesting. It's not available in the shops yet, I don't think, although I'm sure it will be soon. But the Kickstarters are getting fulfilled. So, if you know someone who knows someone, they might have a game. So I'm sure you can dig it out. But yeah, thank you for your time. If you've enjoyed this, subscribe. If you haven't enjoyed this, then maybe tell someone who might enjoy it and they can subscribe. And thank you for your time. Cheers.